Paul. It's a delight to be here. It's getting jolly, jolly cold in the UK, so it's fantastic to get some sun at this time of year. When Paul told me at the weekend that he was planning to introduce the keynotes by asking them to say 5 things that the internet didn't know about us, I was really, really challenged, and it's taken me till this morning to come up with 5 things. And I'm not entirely sure whether they might already be on the internet anyway. They will be. Well, Derek will be tweeting, I'm sure, posed as we speak. The first is that my favourite animal is the giraffe, and I was lucky enough to see some at the weekend. My favourite opera is The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. One of my favourite authors is Iris Murdoch. I have a terrible, terrible fear of heights. And the most amazing country I've ever been to, apart from South Africa, is Iran. So there are 5 things. I'm giving it 5 seconds for Derek to tweet that. Okay, so just a little bit more about me. The silly name, useful in my area because it makes me Google unique. I'm originally from Ireland, but I moved to the UK when I was 5. My original background, I think like a lot of us, I've moved into this area from a disciplined perspective. I did a PhD in chemistry. And I've got 2 lovely girls who keep me in check. If any of you have seen the series Absolutely Fabulous, that's definitely our household. And I've been at Leicester just over 2 years. I was at the Open University UK before, where I'm Professor of Learning Innovation. And I live in a very, very beautiful small village in Northamptonshire called Grimscote. And we do get snow, and they're predicting snow very soon. Somebody last night said to me that it's predicted to be the worst winter in the UK since 1946. So that's going to be really great fun. I'm not looking forward to going back. The girls love it, though, because when we get snow, we get snowed in. They can't go to school. And this is the latest addition to the family, little baby Snapers, helping me with my paperwork. So I head up the Institute of Learning Innovation, and we do a range of things. We do research. We have a number of EU-funded projects, and we're delighted that we've just got 3 new ones which have started in October. We do teaching. We have a new master's program in learning innovation, which is both available online, starting in February and October, and campus-based in October each year. We have a vibrant group of PhD students from around the world, which is fantastic, both face-to-face and online. We do a range of consultancy, and I came here just a year and a half ago with some of the team to do some consultancy for UNISA. We have visiting scholars. If any of you fancy a spot in England, I recommend the summer, not the winter, but you'd be very welcome to come, and we'd be happy to host you. And we provide institutional advice on effective use of technologies. So this is what I'm planning to work through. I'm going to start with the notion of disruption and what that might mean, and critique whether it's about disruptive technologies, pedagogies, or both. And then I'm going to step back and say, why is e-learning important? And then I'm going to provide you with a timeline of what I think have been the key technological developments and their impact in education. And then I'm going to look towards some reports that talk about the future in terms of emergent technologies and how they might be important. And then it's up to you where we go from there. You've got 7 topics that we could go through. We won't be able to get through all of them, and depending on how time goes, we'll probably get through 2 or 3. To try and remember this list and think about which you'd like me to go through, we could talk about learning design. We had a fantastic workshop yesterday here on learning design all day. Really enjoyed it. We could talk about different pedagogical approaches and how they can be facilitated by different technologies. We could talk, of course, about OERs and MOOCs. Presentation wouldn't be a presentation at the moment without MOOCs. We could talk about learning analytics, a fairly hot new topic. We could talk about mobile learning, social media and open practices, or we could talk about digital literacies and identities. So have a think of that list as I'm talking through the first part of the talk, and we'll see which you'd like to explore. There's an excellent short video, about 10 minutes, by Ken Robinson, who many of you, I'm sure, will have heard of and listened to, called Changing Educational Paradigms. And he argues that today's educational system is rooted in a kind of outdated 200-year paradigm, and that we need to shift significantly if we're going to prepare our students for an uncertain future, for a future where they're going to be doing jobs that don't even exist and that we can't even imagine today, and that we need to fundamentally change things. A really excellent video. In terms of disruptive technologies, there's a lovely book by John Norton from the Open University, From Gutenberg to Zuckerberg, and he argues that today's technologies are as revolutionary as the introduction of the printing press. And he gives 9 specific examples of characteristics of the internet. And one in particular struck me, that disruption is a feature of the internet. It's not a fad, it's not a flaw. And Einstein has this quote, which I think is very apt: "Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think." And I think we should remember this in all of what we're doing in trying to promote and facilitate learning through the use of technologies. I'm just going to show you a short video of one example, I think, of a disruptive technology. I think the buffer's going. I hope you'll agree that that's pretty amazing. These technologies are available and will be very soon in our daily lives. And I can't imagine what the impact will be for learning, but I think it's bound to be quite profound. I love the bit when the girls take a picture of the footprint and it shows them which animal it is. So why do I think e-learning is important? I think it's important for 2 reasons. The first is, of course, for learning, in terms of the ways in which we can provide our learners with amazing, rich, interactive multimedia, the ways in which we can support different forms of communication and collaboration. We talked yesterday in the workshop about the ways in which we can use basic LMS tools like discussion forums, wikis and blogs in different ways to promote different types of communication and collaboration. But also I think it's important in terms of helping our students to develop their necessary digital literacy skills. Yes, our students have grown up in a world where they can't imagine not being able to Google things, where they've all got computers. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have the necessary academic skills to be able to make effective use of technologies. And so I think we need to foster that and promote it with our learners. To look at different pedagogical approaches, and as I said, that's one of the options we could look at later in the talk. And to foster 2 key aspects, I think, of helping to prepare our students for an uncertain future, to make them critical thinkers and problem solvers in terms of promoting creativity and innovation. And it's also about connecting them beyond formal courses, particularly through social media. Our students can now have access on a global scale, have access to experts in the field. But more importantly, I think it's also about preparing them for an uncertain future. Increasingly, employers are looking for students who have not just subject expertise, but can critically think and problem solve. And of course, it's about the increasing importance of technology across all aspects of society. We now feel like we're working below par if we can't get online access the whole time. I was recently in India, and there wasn't very good internet. I was there for 3 days. And after 3 days, my colleague texted me and said, "Are you dead? You've not been online for 3 days." So it really is a case that technology is pervasive across everything we do. Last year I did a talk for Vice-Chancellors and Rectors across Europe. It was in the European Parliament in Brussels, which is the most amazing building. It's huge. And in the room that I was in, around the top, there were interpreter booths who were simultaneously translating all the talks into 23 European languages. Quite amazing. And I decided to do this timeline to give an indication of what I thought were the key milestones. And I started where I came into this area in the late 80s in terms of the emergence of tools to help us to create rich multimedia resources. And then, of course, 93, we had the emergence of the web. And I don't think any of us could have predicted the internet and the web or could have foreseen how it would transform our lives in so many different ways. Does anybody know why Tim Berners-Lee invented the web? You'd think it would be something profound, wouldn't you? It was because he had a bad memory and he wanted to create his own digital filing cabinet, as it were. So really quite amazing. We had the emergence of learning objects, the precursors to open educational resources in around about 94. The notion that there wasn't any need to create 100 economics courses, that we could create one and we could share it and we can adapt. And we could have, if you like, a digital educational marketplace of sharing and exchange. Learning management systems emerged around 95, and they were important for 2 reasons. Firstly, they made institutions realize that technologies were no longer a peripheral innovation, but actually they were core to the offering of what we were providing our learners. And so they set up committees to manage these, set in place policies in terms of what they were prepared to offer their students in terms of online technologies. And secondly, they provided us as academics with a safe nursery slope, if you like, to enable us to explore the use of technologies which mimicked our own practice. So we could put up our lectures, we could interact with the students, communicate with them, we could set up spaces for students to upload assignments, and we could provide feedback on them. And they've become pervasive now, not just across higher education, but all educational sectors. Mobile devices, the first version came around towards the end of the 90s. Laughable now when we compare them with the current very small and slick devices. And there was a lot of rhetoric in the early days about learning anywhere, anytime. I think that now has become a reality with things like smartphones, with tablet devices. And in Leicester, we've been trialling the use of iPads in a number of departments, criminology, education, and all our first-year medics now. In criminology, the students on the master's course are working in very dangerous parts of the world where there's little or no internet access, and having all of their materials on the devices has made a huge difference to them, and evaluation of that program has been very successful. Learning design emerged around about the 99. The notion that we could provide academics with support and advice on how to make more effective design decisions that were pedagogically effective and made appropriate use of new technologies. And that's something we could explore later on. Gamification, around about 2000. Interestingly, and I'll show you in some reports in a moment, that notion is now coming back into the discourse. Open educational resources, around about 2001, promoted by organisations like UNESCO and the Hewlett Foundation, with the fundamental fact that education is a fundamental human right and should be freely available. And UNESCO estimate there are something like 10 million learners who can't afford access to formal education. So OERs and MOOCs offer them a real lifeline out of the poverty trap. Social and participatory media, it's amazing to think it's only 2004. I don't know about you, but certainly things like Twitter and Facebook have absolutely transformed the way I do things. My blog has transformed the way I research as a researcher. And virtual worlds about 2005, a lot of hype around virtual worlds at that time practically disappeared off the discourse. Anyone working on virtual worlds? No, that's amazing. If we'd gone back 5 years, there would have been quite a few hands gone up. E-books and smart devices around about 2007. And then, of course, massive open educational courses, MOOCs in 2008 with the connectivist learning MOOC by George Siemens and others. And it's amazing when you look at that timeline to realize that the internet and the web is only 20 years old. We're in 2013, 93 was when it started. 20 years is a very short time, quite amazing. A little while ago I asked on Facebook and Twitter for some examples of good videos that exemplified the use of technologies, particularly in an educational context, and that's where I got that link to the glass video that I showed you. And Eric Duval in Belgium sent me this link, 16 classic films that got future technology right. It's always nice to look back at sci-fi films and see whether what they predicted was real or not. The one that always comes to my mind is the 1930s film Metropolis, where you've got kind of cars flying through a skyscraper land, and that hasn't happened yet. But back to the future, wearable technologies, now a reality with things like Google Glasses. Good old total recall, and in terms of Johnny cabs, self-driving cars. Milton Keynes in the UK is just about to launch self-driving cars. The classic Space Oddity is a precursor to Skype. Where would we be without Skype and FaceTime now? Minority Report, in terms of Tom Cruise, very good example of that glass video that I showed you, touchable interfaces. I love the bit in the video when the girl's in the back of the car with her iPad and she just flicks. She doesn't even touch the device, she just flicks and the application goes up to the front of the car. And finally, again, Space Oddity as a precursor to Siri. Now, in some ways, these look rather mundane. We've become so used to these already. They've become so embedded in what we do that we don't think of them as anything unusual. But it's always good to look back and reflect and see how much things have changed. If we had time, it would be really fun to get each of you to reflect on your own personal digital environment. What are the core tools you use every day, and why do you use them, why that mix? And how many of you like Facebook? Alice, why do you like Facebook? You're connected to people all around the world, and you hear about people trapping cats in washing machines. Who hates Facebook? Somebody nearby. Lady here, why do you hate it? Don't know how to use it. We all have very strong views on these social media. Some of us love them, some of us hate them. My two daughters, the 15-year-old loves Facebook. She's always poking me and sending me emoticons. The 19-year-old hates it. She thinks it's the work of the devil. She thinks I'm addicted. When she comes into the kitchen, I quickly switch to email, and I try to look terribly professorial. And she just walks past me and says, "Mummy, get off Facebook. I know you're on Facebook. You're addicted." And anyone who is connected with me on Facebook probably thinks I'm addicted too. So we have very strong views, and so do our learners. And that's something we need to take account of, that they will have very different views. These students are immersed in a technological world. The good students are able to really harness that and use it effectively for their learning. Arguably, anything you want to learn is available for free, well, mainly for free, on the internet. The trouble is the weaker students are even more disadvantaged. They're drowning in this technological landscape. And so we really need to think about ways of helping them to develop their digital literacy skills, their academic skills, to harness the power of these new technologies. So a couple of reports that are useful in terms of a glimpse of the future. The New Media Consortium Horizon reports, which come out every year, are a really good indicator of technologies which will have an impact in 1, 3 and 5 years' time. They list MOOCs and tablet computing within the 1 year time frame. MOOCs is the massive discourse. I haven't been to a presentation in the last few months that hasn't mentioned MOOCs. The New York Times Higher voted 2012 the year of the MOOC. Tablet computing, and we are increasingly seeing these amazing devices. We had a delegation from India a few weeks ago, and as a thank you present, they gave me a little tablet device, typically about the size of an iPad mini. It was an Akash, I think is the name of it. It's a fully functional tablet, plus a fully functional Linux platform, so you can run OpenOffice and other software. Anyone want to guess how much that device cost? 23 UK pounds, which would be how many rand? 230 rand. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And they're planning to roll these devices out across India for school children. Games and gamification, they list in the 3-year time frame, and learning analytics. If you haven't come across the term learning analytics, it's about harnessing the power of the data underneath our learning management system, either for academics to be able to see what the students are doing, identify students who are struggling, and then be able to support them by ringing them or emailing them, but also giving those tools to learners so that they can better manage their learning time, their study patterns. And in the 5-year time frame, 3D printing, and I saw my first 3D printing device recently, quite amazing, and wearable technologies within the 5-year time frame. An excellent report, this is an annual report from people at the Open University, Mike Sharples and colleagues, called Innovating Pedagogies, talks about the 10 technologies they think are having an impact at the moment or in the near future. Again, they mention MOOCs and badges to accredit learning. The infrastructure now to support badges to help blur the boundary between informal and formal learning is now in place. And badges are increasingly being used, particularly in the MOOC arena, but also in more formal settings too. Learning analytics, and the OU is one of the places that's doing a lot of work on this, as is Eric Duval in Belgium and George Siemens and colleagues in Canada. There's an excellent annual conference called the LAC Conference. So if this is a topic you're interested in, I would recommend looking that up. Seamless learning, or learning across devices and environments, and increasingly that's true. We connect through the cloud, through different devices, through different places. Crowd learning, harnessing the power of the distributed network of community of peers that we're part of. In a book that I launched a few months ago, I was trying to find a reference, and I couldn't find one reference for it. It was Tony Kaye, 1972. It was a conference proceedings. I Googled lots and lots of citations, but nobody gave the dates of the conference. I couldn't find it anywhere. Googled for hours. And then in frustration, I tweeted and said, I can't find this. Within 5 minutes, I have 5 perfect replies telling me exactly what that reference was. Now, that is incredibly powerful. But these social media are also a two-way process. Yes, I can ask and I can get, and my network will provide me with answers to things I'm looking for, but I also need to provide support as well and give back to that community. Digital scholarship, Martin Weller at the Open University has written an excellent book on this topic, and some academics are now adopting such open practices that they're taking a stance in terms of not reviewing in closed journals, in terms of not publishing in closed journals, that they're doing everything on an open scale. But it does have profound implications in terms of things like research assessment exercises, which is we're just about to go through in the UK, in terms of the tension between adopting open practice and the fact that research metrics are still judged primarily through closed peer-reviewed journals. And I don't know how long it's going to take for that to change. Geo-learning, being able to tag things, being able to go into a museum, see an artifact and have a representation of how that looked. For example, seeing Pompeii as it is today and then seeing a reconstruction of how it was before the volcano. Learning from gaming, again, they mention has been important. Maker culture, I haven't really got my head around this, but the notion of things like 3D printers, so translation from digital to real. And finally, citizen inquiry. 2 nice projects related to that. Galaxy Zoo in the States, which is a site where amateur astronomers can upload sightings of stars in the sky. I just saw on Facebook this morning there's an amazing comet that's going to be around next month. And iSpot, which is a site for uploading fauna and flora. Every year in the UK we have something called the Spring Watch. And the general public are asked to give indications of the first sightings of spring in London or in Glasgow, you know, the first appearance of daffodils or what have you. The BBC's now teamed up with the iSpot site, and it's encouraging the general public to have a greater interest in science education. But behind that, academics are actually harnessing that massive data that the public is providing to get a richer picture of the changing ecology in the UK. So you've got this kind of partnership between promoting science education and using that massive data for scientific inquiry purposes. A nice report from Europe, which gives an indication of where we're going with technologies, is the Mattel report. They did a detailed survey of 4 sectors: the school, higher education, vet sector, and adult education. And they sent out surveys and asked people what were the key emergent technologies and associated issues. So a really excellent report if you have time to look at it. And one that I came across this morning on Facebook, Beyond Prototypes, which gives a summary of the Technology Enhanced Learning Programme, which was funded by our ESRC, our Economics and Social Research Council, which provides a summary of some of the really excellent projects in that programme. So now, just another short video.
Leeds first edition collection, translation worth more than your life.
That you hate ads.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland.
So of course he takes the blue one, otherwise it wouldn't be a film. Right, so now it's time for choice. Who speaks loudest will get their wish. What would people like to hear? Learning design. Okay. Topic close to my heart. So this work, as I say, has been pioneered really by people in Europe and in Australia. And the core problem we've been trying to address is the fact that social and participatory media offer fantastic ways in which we can communicate and collaborate with our learners and extend beyond the formal classroom. And they're an amazing array of rich resources and tools. And as I said, arguably anything you want to learn, anything you want to know about is now available on the web. Indeed, we can go further, that there's access to expertise and free courses through things like MOOCs. But these are not being fully exploited, but worse than that, we're hardly scratching the surface of the potential of what these technologies can do. In a survey of our own learning management system, Blackboard, last year, we found that 95% of the LMS was simply as a content repository, uploading docs and PDFs. And so we're getting lots and lots of examples of replicating bad pedagogy. Ron Oliver at Edith Cowan University in Australia talks about electronic web page turning, that's all it is. We're not really harnessing the affordances that these new media offer. And if you ask teachers, and we did a detailed survey across teachers in the Open University. We also gathered 43 case studies of innovation of how people were using the learning management system. Teachers say they're not using technologies much because they lack time, and particularly in research-intensive universities, that's a big issue. Do I spend 3 hours on my teaching or 3 hours on a paper which will get me tenure? And they say that they lack the necessary digital literacy skills, and they also worry about the lack of support. So there's a real fundamental issue here. So learning design as a field has emerged to address that. A group of us have been meeting over the last 2 or 3 years through a fellowship that James DL in Australia had to try and articulate what we mean by learning design and how we see it as distinct but complementary to instructional design. And we came up with this document which is available online, the Larnaca Declaration on Learning Design, which gives a kind of overview of our position, if you like. We called it that because we worked it up in a meeting in Larnaca in Cyprus. And this is the core definition. Teachers need guidance to make informed design decisions that are pedagogically effective and make appropriate use of technologies. This is a kind of conceptual map that we had to represent this, that learning design can be promoted across all pedagogical approaches, and we have a teaching cycle in terms of design and plan, engage with students, reflect professional development. It can work at any level of granularity, and the core concepts are that we're about providing guidance and support to teachers in their design practices, representation and visualization, and I'll show you some examples in a moment of the work that we've been doing, and it's about sharing, because again, if you ask teachers what would help you to make better use of technologies, they say, give me examples of how others have used technology, preferably in my discipline, and give me people I can talk to. So promoting ways in which we can encourage both the representation of designs and the sharing is a core aspect of what we're doing. And those three concepts translate into the tools and resources that we have developed as a community. At Leicester in particular, building on work that's started at the Open University UK, we've developed this conceptual framework to do with learning design called the 7 C's of learning design. All of the resources I'm going to be showing you in the next few minutes are available online and free, so please do use them. All I'd ask is if you get the chance, do come back to us and say whether they were useful or not. So the first C is about conceptualization. It's about creating a vision for the course. Rather than starting with the content, because what we're trying to do here is move beyond content to the learning activities and the ultimate learner experience, it's about thinking about what the vision of your course is. What's the nature of your learners? How are you going to support them? And then there are C's to do with capture, which is about doing an audit of what resources you're going to include or provide for your students. That might be an audit of existing open educational resources. It might be listing what podcasts or text or video you're going to need to produce. Mechanisms to foster effective communication and collaboration. And consider is to do with how you're going to promote reflection in the learners and the aspect of assessment, which may be diagnostic, formative, or summative. And then combine takes you a step back, and you can look at things like the activity profile or how much time students are spending on different kinds of activities. And finally, it's about implementation, the consolidate C. And this is about putting the design into a real learning context and evaluating how effective it is. So for each of these 7 C's, we've developed a whole load of resources and activities. And I'm just going to share with you a few examples. So as I said, conceptualize is about the vision for the course. Why are you developing it? Who's it for? What do you want to design? A colleague of mine, Helen Keegan from Salford University, has a wonderful course which is based on augmented reality with her media and communication students. And a fundamental principle for Helen is risk. It's about taking the students out of their comfort zone. So what she did is she sent half of the students a piece of white paper through the post. They had no idea whether this piece of, who sent this piece of paper or what it was about. The piece of paper had the number 91211. Anyone want to guess what that is? 91211. No? Nope, not postal code. Date, 9th of the 12th, 2011. So the students worked this out and they realized something fundamental was going to happen on that date, but they didn't know what, they didn't know where. And then for the rest of the course, using a mixture of real clues and virtual ones around Manchester, and in particular promoted through a hashtag on Twitter, she seeded them with clues, and they had to work collaboratively to find out what's happening. And they ended up on a cold December morning in the main square in Manchester, and they clicked on the final cue, and immediately all the videos around the square came alive and were showing all the videos that the students had been producing during the course. And it was the most amazing moment. And a lot of the students actually went back over the whole course to fill in the gaps and find all the missing clues. Helen's done a fantastic TED talk on this topic, so if you're interested, do look that up. We're going to look in particular at the course features activity under the conceptualized C. So the course features is a pack of cards, and people were playing with these yesterday, and you decide what kind of pedagogical approaches you want to support in your course. That might be inquiry-based learning, it might be project-based learning. What are the core principles of your course? What kind of guidance and support are you providing for your learners? What kind of content and activities? What forms of reflection and demonstration, and what types of communication and collaboration. So you work through those 6 aspects. Principles could include things like risk. A course I heard about in Australia to do with Aboriginal culture, that would obviously have an element of the importance of local culture. A 3rd level art history course would probably have aesthetics as a really important principle. A vocational course like nursing or teaching would be about applying theory into practice context. So there's a whole range of principles that you can start to pick and choose from. Pedagogical approaches here are a range: inquiry-based, problem-based, dialogic, situative. Vicarious is where you get the learners to teach each other. So one student explains the concepts to the rest of the group. Guidance and support. What, if any, kind of learning pathway are you providing for your learners? So a group of first-year mathematics students would need a much more guided learning pathway than perhaps those working on a professional practice course. Scaffolding, where you provide some support for the students, but over time you fade that support. Step-by-step guidance, additional support from study skills or library or a help desk, or peer support. These are some of the things you can include in terms of content and activities. You might have brainstorming or get the students to annotate things. Jigsaw is very good in terms of fostering collaborative learning. So it's where you divide a problem into 4 parts and get the students working in groups of 4. Each student goes and researches their own part of the problem. Then they get together with students in other groups who've researched the same problem, and they combine their knowledge. And then they go back to their home teams and put together the 4 parts of the jigsaw. Really, really nice, very well researched and used form of collaborative learning. Reflection and demonstration, as I mentioned before, it could be diagnostic, formative, or summative. It might be through peer feedback. You might be getting students to gather evidence in an e-portfolio. It might be multiple choice questions through e-assessment, etc. So there's a range of ways in which we can promote everything from basic now reflect on what you've learnt through to demonstration of their learning. And finally, communication and collaboration. Here are some examples. You might have some kind of structured debate. A flash debate is where you pick a hot topic of the moment. So I was recently in New Zealand, and there's been, as you know, probably a series of earthquakes there. If I was teaching on a geology course, I could say in the forum, okay, students, there's just been another earthquake in Wellington. It registered 4.8. Discuss the difference it makes in terms of whether the earthquake is a surface level one or a deep one, and the kind of impact in terms of damage. So there's a range of ways in which we can formulate different ways in which students can communicate and collaborate. Capture is about doing an audit of existing free resources you might use, or planning for which ones you want to create, or perhaps putting in place mechanisms for students to create their own resources. Communicator, as I said, is ways in which we can foster communication. A discussion forum can be a fabulous mechanism for dialogic learning, for encouraging debate, depending on how it's used, depending on how well it's moderated. And similarly, in terms of collaboration, and I mentioned the jigsaw approach as one way of doing that. Consider then enables you to map learning outcomes to assessment elements, and also includes things like, as I said, formative, summative, and diagnostic learning. And combined, we're going to look at 3 examples: the course view, the activity profile, and the storyboard. So the course view takes the course features that I talked about a few minutes ago, and then gets you to drill into it in a bit more detail in terms of articulating exactly what kind of guidance and support you're providing for your learners. That might be a link to the website, the module handbook. It might be saying when the tutor is available. It might be indicating that a tutor will respond to email inquiries within 48 hours, or what have you. What kind of content and activities the students will engage with, the forms of reflection and demonstration, and finally communication and collaboration. So in this activity, participants complete those in as much detail as possible. The activity profile enables you to look at what the learner is spending time on. So assimilative activities include reading, viewing, and listening to something. Information handling might be manipulating data in a spreadsheet. It might be getting the students to collate a load of resources and summarize them in a wiki. Communication is obvious. Production might be creating a chemical compound or an architectural model. Experiential, drill and practice, work-based learning. Adaptive is quite specialised but important in the sciences. This is to do with modelling or simulation. So you might have an interactive resource which shows a pendulum swinging and then enable the students to alter variables and see what effect it has on the swing, whether it makes it faster or slower. And then how much time they're spending on assessment. You can also get the students to complete the activity profile. I did Spanish at the Open University as an online student. I did 2 courses, and when I did my profile, fantastic resources, really great books and DVDs. But what I found when I did my profile was my lowest column was communication. And that is by far my weakest Spanish skill. So there's a direct correlation between what we get the students to spend time on and what they achieve in terms of learning. And finally, in terms of putting it all together, we can create a storyboard. This is a temporal sequence for your design. So you list the weeks and the topics at the top, the learning outcomes at the side, and then you have the activities the students are going to engage with over those time frames. You can see in this example, in week 1, they're reading a document and watching a video. In week 2, they're reading a document and listening to a podcast. And in weeks 3 and 4, they're listening to a podcast, watching a video, and reading a document. So those are the inputs to the activity. And the outputs are below. So in week 1, they produce a written document. In week 2, a blog post. And finally, they do a group presentation, and they write a critical reflection on their learning individually. And then you can have the assessment elements. So in week 1, it might be the tutor providing formative feedback on the essay they've produced. In week 2, you might be getting the students to peer critique 2 other students' blog posts. And in weeks 3 and 4, you might be doing a summative assessment in terms of the group presentation and the documents that they've produced. And finally, we just check that all of those learning outcomes are mapped to those assessment elements, or what Biggs refers to as constructive alignment. So that's a kind of temporal sequence of your whole design. So each of these designs feed into this final storyboard. That's just an example from a design workshop we ran recently. You can see the blue bits in the middle of the activities, and then we've kind of mapped in the way I was showing you just now. And finally, it's about implementing the design in a real learning context, which might be through a virtual learning environment or LMS, or it might just be in the classroom. Another project I'm involved with, an EU-funded project, MESSES, has created an integrated learning design environment which builds on these conceptual designs I've just been showing you, but goes right through, thank you, right through to implementation in LMS. At the moment, it's just Moodle, but the plan is to roll that out to other LMSs as well. So if you're interested in that, do follow that link at the bottom. We're really excited about it. We think it's going to be a great project. Every time you see the blue house, it means we're going back to the menu. So get ready with what you'd like for your next topic. Learning analytics. So this is the advantage of sitting at the front. You see, you get heard more. So learning analytics is a really hot topic that's come out in the last few years. This is one definition from the US Department of Education. Measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their contexts for the purpose of understanding and optimizing learning and the environments in which it occurs. George Siemens is one of the founders who's been leading in terms of this area of research. And I like this quote: "We leave trails everywhere we go, and that data is valuable." So as I said before, the key notion with learning analytics is to harness the massive data underneath our learning management systems to be better able to understand what our learners are doing, and in particular to identify where they're struggling. Abelardo Pardo is another person who's been very involved in this area from Spain. He's based in Madrid, and he identifies these 5 steps: collecting data, reporting, predicting, acting, refining. And for me, there's an exciting relationship between learning analytics and learning design. If we can understand what's happening in our LMS and how our students are interacting, we can better improve our design practices. This is a diagram from the Open University. You can't see it too well. I will, of course, make my slides available. This is in a project at the Open University called RISE. But it's got these elements: plan and improve the learning design, specify the delivery methods, realise, student engaging, assessment and completion, learning pathway review. So going round that full cycle connecting learning design with learning analytics and vice versa. There's a very good website if you'd like to learn more about this, the Solar website, and there's an excellent introductory report on learning analytics, where it's got to, what some of the key initiatives are. And as I mentioned before, there's an annual conference called the LAC conference, which has been held now three years in a row. Learning analytics is a new form of analytics more generally. This is a tool that you can put onto your laptop to see how much time you're spending on different applications. I wouldn't dare put it on because it would probably tell me that I'm spending 95% of my time on Facebook. But you can actually see the mix of time you're spending on things. There are also things like Runkeeper, where you can gather data about your jogging patterns. And it's also linked to social media. So if you're staying in a hotel, it'll come to you and say, okay, you're staying in this hotel, other people who have similar running patterns to you have taken this pathway and it's taken this long, or so-and-so is planning to run around the park at 5:45 tomorrow morning. If you want to go with them, meet in the lobby just before that time. And you can see how you could translate this into a learning context in terms of saying, other learners who are similar to you have done this kind of pattern, or if you're struggling with these concepts, you might like to get together with this study buddy group of people. Eric Duval and his colleagues, and in particular his third-year students, have been producing some really nice learning analytics apps. People are struggling with trying to find the metaphors for how you represent the data in simple and useful formats. So people are playing around with the notion of dashboards, but also the kind of idea of traffic lights, where red means you're not on target, green means you are, for example. And again, here is something to go across. You can drill down the data in all sorts of different ways. You can look at the course experience, particularly at the assessment, or more nebulous things like development of graduate and personal goals. So in this example on the right, the student is fine in terms of stat literacy, fine in terms of international, but she's struggling in terms of meeting her competence in terms of being a global citizen. And again, you can represent the data in numerical formats. You can compare an individual learner's pattern of interaction with those of a class cohort. And I think it has three key contributions to the field. Firstly, to understand better learning behaviour and being able to deal with that, and to provide evidence to improve the design of learning environments and the learning offerings we're providing with our learners, and to make more effective use of social and participatory media. As I mentioned with the Runkeeper example, combining the information, the data about the learners' study patterns, and saying other students who have similar kind of patterns are here, and this is how you can connect. And some of the current things that people in the field are looking at is trying to understand how we can use learning analytics more effectively. There's a lot of hype and excitement about it, but it's really trying to dig down which data do we want to capture and how are we going to use it. And will academics and will learners find it useful? But also integrating analytics into existing courses, but increasingly people are also starting to look at MOOCs. Open to Study, which is the Australian, Open University of Australia's MOOC platform, is based on Moodle plus Drupal, but also has fantastic learning analytics tools that they're using to understand patterns of behaviours in MOOCs. And as I said before, I think an exciting area for me, and something I'd be interested in being more involved in, is the relationship between learning design and learning analytics, so that design is informed by past experience about patterns of learning behaviour. And I think it can also be used to foster more effective approaches to assessment and feedback, inquiry and sense-making, and discourses. So I think we have time for at least one more. Sorry? Mobile. Okay. So you're getting competitive now. Love it. So as I said before, I was very dubious about the first generation of mobile devices, but I do think these kind of things are transformative now, and I've certainly found, but it takes us a while to get into it, doesn't it? I had an iPad and I didn't really use it, and then I won an iPad mini at a conference at the end of last November, and it sat in my kitchen for ages. And then I took it away with me when I was going to do a talk in Saudi Arabia and found it really valuable as an ebook. And now I find that I use my iPad mini for 90% of what I do. So it takes us a while to kind of appropriate these new technologies into our daily practice. And as I said, it'd be a nice exercise for each of you to not only reflect what your current mix of technologies are, but also how they differ from 5 years ago and why you're using particular media. I'm really phobic about email. I don't know why. And anybody who knows me knows that if they want to get in touch with me, the best way to do it is via Facebook or Twitter, not via email. And we can support all these range of things. We can have study calendars. The iPhone there has got a picture of the Open University's study calendar for a course. If you study as an Open University student, you get through the post all your resources, and you get a big sheet of A3 paper which has your study calendar, and it lists what you're expected to do each week and when your assignment deadlines are, etc. Now, two things happen to every OU student. The first is when you get the box through the post, as I did, you open it, you think, ooh, I'm an OU student, I'm a Spanish learner, fantastic. And then you open the study calendar and you panic because you think, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? So many things to do. And that's classic, but these are now available on mobile devices. Our criminology department, as I mentioned, has a master's program where the students are in difficult and dangerous parts of the world with very limited access to the internet. And they have all their resources preloaded on the iPads. When we did an evaluation, my colleague Therese Beard did an evaluation of this, she found that over 50% of the students used the iPad every day for learning, and a further 30% used it 4 or 5 times a week. And despite the fact that the materials were also available on the LMS, they were using those resources far less frequently. And the resources could be kind of rendered in really pretty kind of ways. In criminology, they appointed an app development. In education, Phil Wood has been using simple iAuthor to create interactive materials. And also archaeology has been using smart devices for a number of years to collect data in the field. Archaeology, many of you will know, is an important subject for us at Leicester. We recently discovered the bones of one of our kings, Richard III, under a car park. And funnily enough, it had the exact spot where he was. It had a manhole with the letter R on. And so our applications for archaeology have gone through the roof. The marketing director is delighted. I first heard about this through Facebook. I didn't know what was going on. People were saying, Richard III is still dead. And I was thinking, what's going on? But so lots of uses of increasingly using devices. And I'm very excited to hear how the first-year medics get on with these devices. So it's about shifting to M-learning and understanding what M-pedagogies might be. And the benefits are anywhere, anytime for learning. So it's about efficiency, it's about grabbing moments of time for learning and being able to learn in different contexts. This is one of the students on the criminology masters sitting in his coffee break, just having a look at some of the resources. And there are all these kind of benefits or affordances of mobile devices. The fact that they're small and compact and light, you can personalize them in so many different ways. And again, it's interesting to see how we lay out the structure of our iPads or our iPad minis and what we think is important and why. And the ways in which it can enable not just the teacher but the students to capture sound, video and images. And there are lots of nice tools now for curation. A great tool for iPad is called SpringPad, if you haven't come across it. If you find an interesting resource, you can include it into SpringPad, and you can have different little folders for different kind of things. So if I'm interested in the topics of learning design and I find an interesting article, I can include it into my SpringPad folder on learning design. So other examples, I mentioned Phil Wood. This is a screenshot of one of his courses. He has a conceptual framework where he takes students to connect, which is orientating them to the learning, through to demonstrate, for example. He always includes at the beginning of each week a short video introducing the topic. He has links to podcasts and other videos and resources. And as I said, we now are moving to using iPads with our undergraduate medics. Manchester University has given all their medics iPads for a number of years. So it's paperless, it's personal, it's anywhere, anytime. And if you think about the amazing wealth of resources medics need access to, then this is going to be incredibly valuable, I think. Therese lists these as some of the benefits, again, the size and portability. In the old days, the Open University used to estimate that to read from a computer screen as opposed to paper, you needed to factor in 30% extra time for the learners. But now with the kind of retina displays and the kind of displays that we've got on smart devices and e-books, I don't think that's true. I think it's now true that it's actually becoming increasingly easy to read on the screen. Being able to bookmark and annotate, and being able to access cloud computing in different ways, and the fact that it's easy on the eye. So, we go back. How am I doing for time, Paul? Great. So I think we've got time for one more topic. Sorry? Pedagogical approaches. It's all women answering this. Fine. Okay, so I'm going to go through 4 examples. Drill and practice learning, inquiry-based learning, situative learning, and immersive learning. There are some people in the field that argue for learner-centered pedagogies, for constructivism as being the way to go. I don't agree. I think in different learning contexts, you need different pedagogical approaches. And by the way, drill and practice is an incredibly important pedagogy still. As a learner of Spanish, I can't learn Spanish in constructivist ways all the time. Yes, I can if I'm in a cafe in Spain, be listening and immersing myself and listening to, picking up Spanish phrases. But the reality is I have to sit down at some point and just learn my vocabulary, learn how to conjugate the verbs. So I'm going to show you these 4 examples. So this is the Open University's open mark e-assessment system, way beyond just simple multiple choice questions. You've got a rich chemical equation here. The students can link out to a chemical drawing package like ChemDraw and then come back and put their answers. And the answers can be much more personalised and contextual. This is some examples for drill and practice in Spanish. I was in New Zealand recently and had terrible jet lag, kind of getting 1 to 3 hours sleep a night. And I had this very nice little app where it puts the word and then you've got a number of options and you click on which is the right image and the frog eats it if you get it right. Anyone know what manzana is Spanish for? Apple, well done. Yeah, so you click on the apple and it goes into the... Very simple, but actually kind of really quite engaging. And it's like carrot and maize I hadn't got into my head before. So just working through these. A step up from that, here's another app. In this case, it's helping with my oral comprehension. It hurts here. It will speak to me the Spanish equivalent. Right up to quite sophisticated apps. This is a full Spanish to English dictionary. It costs about 150 rand, so it's not cheap. But actually, my paper-based dictionary I've never opened. I just use this very detailed dictionary, which not only gives you the word, but gives you the different expressions. It conjugates the verbs for you. So you can have very simple free apps right the way through to quite complex ones to support drill and practice, to support didactic learning. Mike Sharples and Eileen Scanlon led on an ESRC-funded project called Personal Inquiry, which was about promoting scientific understanding in school children and getting them to adopt inquiry-based processes. They did a detailed review of the literature and produced an online tool which is available online but can also be downloaded onto smart devices. And Doug Clough and colleagues at the Open University developed the iSpot site I mentioned earlier on. So this is the inquiry-based framework that Mike and Eileen came up with from the literature. Goes through the stages of inquiry-based thinking, find my topic, decide my inquiry question or hypothesis, plan my methods, right round to reflect on my progress. And this conceptual framework is built into the device, and then students can go round Milton Keynes and kind of gather data. So here you've got a picture of some of the students. When the project was running, it was the small ACES tablets that they were using, and they were gathering data about temperature, pollution, wind speed, all sorts of things about going around two cities, Milton Keynes and Northampton. And that tool, Enquire, is available to download from the site. iSpot, as I mentioned before, enables you to upload sightings for flora and fauna and is being used by scientists to understanding the changing ecology of the UK. A lovely story, there was a 6-year-old student, a girl from Milton Keynes, who took a picture on her phone of a moth, and her dad uploaded it, and the scientists went wild because this moth had never been seen in the UK before. So it was giving a really strong indication of how things were changing in the UK. Very, very nice site. Situative learning, Mark Childs, a colleague of ours who's a visiting fellow with us, has just written an excellent book, Springer book on virtual worlds. And there are very good examples of how virtual worlds can support situative learning and role play, from the simulation of archaeological digs or medical wards, through to art exhibitions where you can enable students to upload their artwork and have experts from around the world come in virtually and comment on those. Nice example from Harvard in terms of a role-play experience to do with cyber law, etc. And a recent tool I came across on smart devices, smartphones, was this one, where you speak into your device and it immediately puts the text there and translates it immediately and speaks back to you in the language you're learning. And I saw this demonstrated and it was literally instantaneous. What that means for the future of language learning and and cultural diversity, I'm not sure, but these tools are increasingly becoming prevalent and affordable. My colleague Paul Rudman and Susan Lavelle have done a nice project in Second Life called SWIFT, which was where they created a virtual genetics lab where students could learn health and safety in the lab and also collect data from virtual instruments. And what's exciting there is if you have a titration, for example, in the real world, all you'll see is the liquid going down. But if you have it in the virtual world, you can layer on top of that a simulation showing the students chemically what's actually happening in that experiment. And immersive learning, this is a tool from Google Immersion, where I'm reading an article on MOOCs, but actually what's happening is the tool is translating parts of that page into the language I'm learning. So you can see lousy pedagogy and Hasser damage to the image has damaged the image of online learning. Jeff Hayward, who is also the Vice Principal for Knowledge Management. And so what's happening is I'm reading that article, but indirectly I'm improving my Spanish learning. So I think I'm probably pretty much out of time if we want to leave some time for questions. Thank you for listening.